My next guest on the show is Michelle Hurn. I absolutely adore Michelle and her wife, Corrine. So happy I got to meet both of them. Really a huge fan of Michelle. She's a registered dietitian. If you don't know her, she wrote the book, The Dietitian's Dilemma, which is an excellent book, excellent resource. She's also the author of the children's book, The Fox Family Food Fight, where little Freddie Fox gets foxabetes. So Michelle is absolutely passionate about nutrition education, particularly around diabetes. So, helping people with type 2 diabetes reverse their type 2 diabetes, but also helping with type 1 diabetics using less of insulin by using nutrition and lifestyle. So, she's a fabulous resource for that. She's also an ultra runner and she's super cool. So, you might just want to follow her for that. But I wanted to have Michelle on to talk about mental health. She is such an inspiration. Her personal journey with mental health is very inspiring. So I wanted her to just share a bit about that. We talk about eating disorders and we talk about mental health, anxiety in particular, and we talk about meat and meat for mental health and, well, just nutrition in general for mental health. It's always really helpful to have a registered dietitian that loves what I love to talk to you all about nutrition and mental health. So I hope you enjoy the show as much as I enjoyed talking to Michelle. Michelle, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on.
I loved getting to see you in person and getting to hear your story in person. I've followed you for a long time, but then getting to meet you was really special for me. I've just really connected to you and your wife. So, yeah, so I'm really happy to have you on and get you to talk about your story a little bit and see where we go.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so I have your book, moving through the book. And I was telling you before we started recording, I have heard your story. I heard it live, and it's very compelling. And yet, reading it was just so powerful for me. Like, I could not put it down because I was getting more of the details, probably, but also I just am so grateful that you have the courage to keep telling your story and put it out there because there's a mental health piece, there's the nutrition piece, there's eating disorder piece. There's so much to the story. So I thought maybe we could start there and talk
Sure.
a little bit about what happened and how you decided to become a dietitian and how exciting that was, and then what a letdown that has been.
Yeah. So, my health journey really began when I was 12 years old. When I was 12 years old, I was diagnosed with anorexia. I was 5 feet tall and 57 and a half pounds.
Yeah.
Excuse me. And, as you read, like I passed out in school. That's literally how I was. My parents really found out, the world was very different back then, before we had camera phones and cell phones and all that. I wore really baggy clothes and nobody really noticed that I, in a very short period of time had lost probably about 35 pounds. And very quickly, I ended up in an inpatient treatment center for 2 months. Was immediately put on the standard American diet. I was made to, eat. It got up to about 3,000 calories a day. And I was being fed on a 24-hour tube feeding system. And, the tube feeding ingredients back then, I was 12 years old back then, were corn syrup, maltodextrin, soy protein, canola oil. Listen, the tube feeding ingredients, fast forward 28 years later, are still the same. So, you took somebody who was, in starvation, basically. I was eating under 200 calories a day and exercising, every moment that I could, and put them on this, very highly processed, high carbohydrate diet. And I was told even as a young person, like, if you survive this is your new lot in life. Like, people don't recover from anorexia, is what the doctor told me. He said, you will have racing thoughts around food. You will, probably have bouts of depression, anxiety. You may never grow. At that point, I was, not quite 5 feet tall. You're probably going to have lots of aches and pains. You're going to have all kinds of digestive issues. And so I wasn't super surprised when that became my reality, as a young person. I did become weight restored, but I was on, even in treatment, I was on 7 different medications for OCD, for anxiety, for digestive disorders. I would have constipation and diarrhea. I was constantly sick. I was constantly thinking about food.
Mhm.
And yeah, and as I went through, high school and college, I was interested in nutrition. There seemed to be something missing. I knew nutrition was powerful because I had obviously gone from being very underweight to, a normal weight, and I was able to participate in athletics and do some other stuff. But I was at that point, I thought maybe it's, fruits and vegetables. Maybe there's something I'm missing that can really help restore my mental health.
Yeah.
Because as my peers and the people around me just didn't seem to be so depressed and obsessed like I was.
Okay, so there are a few things I just want to point out. When you were first taken to treatment, one of the things that just chokes me up every time is that every time I've heard you say it and then I also read it, but still, it chokes me up every time that your parents were told you overheard the doctor saying that you probably wouldn't make it and they needed to kind of prepare themselves. And as they drove off, you actually felt relief. I think that is I mean, that just breaks my heart for you, but you were just saying to yourself, "What? This is almost
Yeah,
over."
I don't think I'll ever be able to convey in words what it's like to feel the amount of shame, of despair, of hopelessness that an eating disorder entails. And there's certainly a few things going on with anorexia. One, you're so malnourished, you certainly at no point could think critically. Two, our family didn't have a lot of money, and I was acutely aware that my parents were going to have to take a mortgage out on the house, and this was going to make us even worse off financially. So here I am thinking, I'm a burden in my family. I don't even want to live, and I'm putting them through all this. And so, yeah, before my parents left, and I was by myself for 60 days as a 12-year-old. When you're 12, you don't think about that. But I'm as an adult, I'm like, wow, it's a long time to be away from your parents.
Yeah.
Yeah, the doctor had said, hey, I need to talk to your parents. You need to stay here. And of course, I'm 12. So as soon as they left, I wanted to go hear what they were saying. Yeah. And he told my parents, like, look, we don't see people with a BMI under 11. Like, we don't see people recover. And that was the first time in my life I ever saw my father cry. And when my parents came out of, the office, my mom was like, oh, they said you're going to be fine,
Right, of
And I
course.
remember
Yeah.
thinking like, but I remember, I mean, I held it together. Like in that moment, I was like, I refuse to let my parents like this be the last memory they have of me. I'm the youngest. They're going to walk out of here. I'm going to hold my head up high. And as soon as they left, of course I started bawling. So yeah, I was, obviously scared, but the amount of relief, because it finally felt like this is going to end. I've been, as you read in the book, I was getting bullied to the point of, physical injury. I hated myself. I hated what I was doing to my family. I was just so, you just have all these racing thoughts in your head. You're worthless. You're a terrible person. You're ugly. You're fat. You're stupid. Why are you even here? And so it finally felt like this is almost going to be over, And in my head, I felt like I just have to wait it out. Just give it a few days, and then I won't wake up, and it'll be okay.
Gosh. Oh, that's so hard. It's so hard to know that know you now and know that that's what you had to go through or did go through to get to where you are now. That's just it's a really heavy, it's hard, and thank goodness you pulled through. Do you remember at any point feeling like something pulled you up or you just kept going and you just got better? Like,
Yeah, yeah. I definitely initially in treatment, when I'd wake up in the morning, I'd be so angry. I was like, ah, it's still here. Like, God, how much longer? And at that point, tube feeding systems are very different than they used to be. They were huge and they'd get clogged. I'd wake up like soaked in tube feeding formula. And I was just, on all kinds of agony from all the, ingredient, the sugars and flours. And I just was so angry. But
mhm.
it was actually about a year and a half after I got back from treatment. I'm very close to my next oldest sister, and I
Yes.
don't remember the exact moment or whatever, but we started. spending more time together. We started, yeah, she was working at a pizza place. I started eating food and processed foods and a lot more stuff, and just slowly but surely, I don't want to say snapped out of it, but it almost became like I wasn't as afraid of food anymore, and was able to gain enough weight to, to be considered weight restored and to be able to participate in athletics that next year.
Right, which was super important to you. You had gotten hooked on running. Um,
Not
and
before then, but
not
yeah.
before that, but you were also a little star soccer player when you started wanting to get faster and leaner, and so it kinda start I think sometimes people are like, "How in the world does this happen?" And it's not that foreign. And then when you start restricting and then you're so malnourished and your brain's not working well, all kinds of things get distorted. So and you just really had body dysmorphia. I mean, that's a lot of other things going on too, but then that sort of took a hold for you. And so,
Severely.
yeah, but thank bless your sister. Like that sister that like, okay, we're going to get you junk food, but whatever. You started eating. And I think
Yes.
that's what I also loved in the book where you talk about being mad at the dietitian and saying, "I'm gonna grow up, I'm gonna be better. I'm gonna be better than you are. I can do this better than you." I think there's something about being mad that actually can be motivating for us. So the fact that you were
100%.
mad that you were waking up is not great, but the fact that you were mad is like, "Oh, that's interesting." Like,
Yeah, anger can be a really positive thing. I think sometimes in society we're scared of anger, like everything has to be joyful, but I would be much more scared of a person who just doesn't care, because, when you're angry, like you have some fire, there's something left there, right? And
mhm,
and it's all, I mean, life is so much just about how you channel your emotions. And once I got better, because I had, the first initial doctor told me, or told my parents, I wasn't supposed to hear that you're not going to live. And it went from, well, you're not going to live to, well, maybe you'll never grow. And it was all those things. You're going to deal with this the rest of your life. And my family doctor said, I'll never approve you for athletics, because he had seen me when I was obviously super sick. And so to kind of go step by step through that, and to show people, I mean, it's one of my biggest advocacies is that the human brain and the human body have a tremendous potential to heal, like greater than anyone has allowed most of us to believe. But
mhm.
often we have to get out of the way. You have there are certain principles to human physiology as far as nutrition, and obviously there's other things, but that's a big one,
Yeah.
that if you follow that, you will heal.
I know that's so powerful. Like what we're able to do. The body is designed to heal. And I really in the last 2 years, because I've always sort of, I mean, I believe that, but I would still do things because we just do, like take medications that suppress and do I was doing things just because that's what we do and that's what I've been trained to do. And as a nutritional therapist, like I loved my training and I thought it was great and I got this nice variety. And then I decided to try carnivore for 30 days and my mind was blown. But it's so hard when you already have a way that you've been taught to really think about the body is designed to heal if it has the right inputs. And that if you have symptoms, the body is already working, it's always working to keep you alive. And so if you have symptoms, it's already working to rebalance things. So these are signals. I don't know why I decided to digress on that, but here you are. You are going to be a dietitian and help people with nutrition. You were a runner at that point. I know there's a lot in the book. We can't get to everything, but I think it's really incredible that I mean, it just goes to show your character and your determination and when you love something, like you go at it. And I think that's also the courage to write the books that you've written and to talk about the things that you talk about takes a lot of courage. So, fast forward, I mean, you must be excited about being a dietitian when you first get out of school and you're gonna go help people and
Yeah, it was a kind of interesting time in life, but I definitely was, I was like, this is it. This is finally, I had, struggled through college, just once again, just not having a lot of money. I'm like, I'm finally gonna have a job. I'm gonna have a paycheck. I'm gonna be helping people. I'm gonna be able to financially support myself. I was so excited. And then, to be a dietitian, you do your 4-year degree, then you have to get into an internship and, hope you match with somebody. And I matched in, Portland, Oregon, where I was living at the time at Oregon Health Science University. And I remember, you're working with preceptors in various areas of dietetics, just things not making sense, like going into the room with somebody with type 2 diabetes and my preceptor saying, okay, we're going to teach them how to have carbohydrates with breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They're going to, max out at about 75 to 90 grams per meal and 2 snacks at 15 grams. And I was like, whoa, wait. I thought their blood sugar was like 250. Yeah, it is. Well, shouldn't we teach them to have less carbohydrates? And she'd be like, no, 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 consistent. And then we medicate them. And so I was kind of pegged as this like difficult dietetic student because I was asking a lot of questions,
Yeah.
and then we went to the ICU, and that's when I flipped over the tube feeding and I was like, oh my God, this is the same stuff I had when I
Right.
was 12. And at that point I was 24. I'll be 41 next week. And it's still the same. And people have reached out and said, oh, Michelle, there's better tube feeding formulas, which is true. But I mean, as recently as 2022, I checked in with one of my buddies who I worked at the hospital in 2020. Those, the better tube feeding formulas, meaning they're whole foods based, are almost never covered by insurance. I mean, in the 16 years that I've been doing this, I had it once. So you're asking someone to pay about $1,500 a day for tube feeding formulas, or get the one that's covered by insurance, which is, the sugar, flour, corn syrup base.
Mhm.
So yeah. And so I just went through the internship and I was just, but you're new, you're young, you're a student, like, okay, maybe I missed something, maybe. And I had doctors tell me like, hey, look, it's not the nutrition that's the problem. It's the guidelines are fine. It's the fact that our patients aren't following them. And I talked to tons of different patients and I was like, man, because you'd see people throughout the internship, they'd come back in and these people genuinely seem to care. They genuinely seem to want to get better. And then when I became a dietitian, all of a sudden you had this huge load of patients, and we called it like frequent flyers, the revolving door of sickness. People
Mhm.
would come in with type 2 diabetes, and then, oh no, now they have an infection. Oh, we have to do an amputation. And you start to become jaded. You start to think like, people just don't care. It's not, and you're just, all the education of dietitians, I think it's very important to note, is heavily sponsored by processed foods,
Mm.
so that was very difficult. It was very difficult, because you kind of get to a point where you're like, am I actually helping somebody, or am I just kind of a cog in the wheel?
Right. And you're getting a paycheck. And so you need a paycheck. You want to do the job well, but then to do the job really well, you would have to do everything opposite of what you're told you have to do. It's this very similar in mental health, by the way, because you have to do this
Mm.
internship and then you get there and you start going, wait, why are we doing this? And this makes no sense. But and your mentors and
Yeah,
people are telling you because this is the way it's done.
so it's done.
And then it's the revolving door. And it's like, well, yeah, because we're just treating symptoms. We're not actually getting to the root of anything. And never, not once in at least 20 years, I did not hear anything about nutrition and mental health. I did not hear anything about metabolic syndrome and how our mental health is connected to our inflammation and metabolic health.
Yeah, they seem to keep it very generic. Like, oh, well, of course, if you're struggling with mental health, if you're overweight, you just need to eat more fruits and vegetables, more whole grains, less, sugar, which is that doesn't help anybody. That advice is completely nonsensical. It doesn't, how we heal is by eating in a way that manages our hormones, that keeps inflammation low, that keeps insulin low. And that takes a specific way of eating. I feel like as a dietitian, I started to feel like, God, a trained monkey can come in here and give a patient an Ensure, like, what am I doing? Well, how am I actually helping anybody?
Right.
But it wasn't really, like you said, you need, you need a paycheck, and this is what my degree is in. My student loans are off the charts, right?
Right.
But it wasn't really until, 2019 when I lost my health, like things just train wrecked for me, that, I made my own like big personal change. And that's what completely set my trajectory differently. And that's, what led to the book and what I do now.
I know. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about run, eat meat, repeat. Yeah,
Yeah.
because you're a runner and you were
Yes.
running at that time, but everything's kind of falling apart. And your anxiety, it seems like anxiety never really left. Like anxiety
No.
was like hanging out.
And depression were constant companions,
Mhm.
but once again, like I didn't overly question that. I didn't, because it
Right.
was like, well, mental illness runs in my family. My mom is bipolar. I know my grandma was bipolar, and the doctor, when that's one thing too. I think we have to be so careful as practitioners is when we label somebody, you can like wear those labels, right? I was like, well, have a history of anorexia, so I'm always going to be anxious. I'm always going to have depression. I'm always going to have these issues. And so, but yeah, in 2019, I was training to qualify for the Olympic trials in the marathon. I think at that point, I'd run like 12 or 13 marathons, and I followed the traditional, very high carbohydrate diet. And I've had people ask me, like, oh, were you eating a bunch of sugar? And I was like, well, yeah, I was having like a dessert, but I was also, I mean, it was 90% whole foods, fruits and sweet potatoes and oatmeal,
Mhm.
lots of carbohydrates. And I remember there was just, and it didn't happen like slow, like very quickly. I was going out for runs and I felt really achy. I was breaking out in cold sweats.
Mhm.
And so, of course, you first say, okay, well, maybe I'm sick. Went to the doctor, had labs run, and like nothing looked unusual. Everything was normal. And so I reached out to a few of my dietitian coworkers, and they said, oh, you're putting in a lot of miles. You need to eat more carbohydrates. And I was like, wow, really? I'm eating, 350 grams a day. That's an awful lot. Oh no, 400, 500. And of course, I'm very driven. So I'm like, okay, I can do this. And as you can imagine, that didn't go particularly well. Hindsight, I can see that, God, I was just crashing my blood sugar, having so many carbs before running, so many carbohydrates throughout the day. And then, kind of the come to Jesus moment was I was working at the a hospital in Portland, and I floated. So I covered different floors, and I was covering oncology, and we had a young patient pass away. So I actually left early, came home, and just achy. My body hurt and I was frustrated. And so I actually went and lied down on the couch, and I woke up, like I fell asleep from like 3 p.m. to like 2 in the morning. And it just hurt. My body hurt. And I remember standing in the kitchen, and I know many people deal with this that are just like, I'm out of solutions. Dr. Google hasn't helped me. I've tried traditional things. I've tried alcohol and some other things. Nothing is helping. And you're just standing there like, I don't know what to do. And so I just remember grabbing my car keys, walking out the door, going to 7-Eleven, getting a bunch of ice, putting it in my bathtub, starting an ice bath by that time, almost 3 in the morning, and crying. And my wife just came in and was like, I think we should do something different. And I was like, you're right. This is stupid. I'm done running. I was 36. I'm like, 36-year-olds shouldn't be trying to qualify for the marathon, and I didn't, I wasn't trying to necessarily make the Olympic team. I just wanted to
Yeah.
qualify for the trials. There's about 250, 300 women that do that. And so it was really hard though, because I've been running since I was 14. And here I was saying like, I'm done. This is it. I mean, at that point, my anxiety had been so bad. I had to call work. I, was dealing with some suicidal ideation.
Right.
It was a mess. I was not, I think Karina, my wife, would probably tell you I was not particularly fun to be around. I was short. It was almost just like survive the day, get through the day, get home. What can I do to not be in so much pain or not be so like, wound up?
Yeah. And you stumbled upon, like, how did you suddenly think, hey, maybe it's the carbs. Hey, maybe I'll try keto. And I think you even went completely off carbs for a while,
I
right?
did. I
Yeah.
did. Yeah. So, and this is where I think like I think all of us have like a deep intuition, right? Like, and I think sometimes we let social media, we let other people, we let everything kind of override that.
Professionals,
It,
doctors, people were
oh
paying to
yeah,
tell. Yeah, I know.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like I'm paying you to tell me this, and it's been terrible advice.
Yeah.
Um, I knew intuitively that carbohydrates did not make me feel well, and specifically the more processed carbohydrates. My mom is very lean. I've been lean my whole life, but even since I was much younger, if I would have, let's say it was like cookies or cake, I would feel very anxious relatively quickly after that. So I kind of tied that together. But I'd always kind of said, oh, I need all these carbs because I run. And of course, with the history of anorexia, I was like, oh, if I eliminate these, that's going to fuel my eating disorder. Can't do that. But I was in so much pain. I thought, why not just give it a rest? Why don't I try a ketogenic diet? And it's interesting. I would consider myself a relatively intelligent human. Even at that point, I was afraid. I was like, God, I'm going to have no energy. I'm going to feel terrible. I got to do some research on this. And that's when I was doing research, I stumbled across the carnivore diet. And I mean, like many people, like I laughed out loud. I was like, are you kidding me? These bozos online are eating all meat. I was like, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And then though, I started to, getting on Instagram and on social media, I was like, my God, a few women I reached out to, I was like, they look really good. They look happy. They look healthy. Their skin is clear. I was
Mhm.
like, I'm not happy. I'm not healthy. My skin is not clear. And so I think, and you and I talked a little bit about this offline, I think one thing that I challenge to everybody, including our health professionals, is humility, and we have to always be willing to learn and grow and change. I'm happy to say now, I'm not always right. I am happy to continue to be open, as I move through my life and my health journey. And I'm so glad that I was at that point because I reached out to a few women and they, yeah, were very kind. So this is what I'm doing. Nobody told me like, you have to do this or, and they just said, this is what I'm doing and this is working. And so I got excited. I said, all right, I'm going to do this for 30 days. Went into the living room, told my wife, this is what I'm doing. I'm so excited. And as you can imagine, she was
Or
like,
he was like,
wow,
"No, we're
this is
not."
great.
Oh, was she? I thought she was like,
No,
"You."
no, no. She was like, no, no, no. Yeah, I was just kidding.
Yeah,
She
no,
was
yeah. She's like, "We're not doing
100%.
that. That's crazy. It's gonna cause you more anxiety around food and your
Yeah,
eating disorder." Yeah.
she
Yeah.
vetoed that. She was
Yeah.
like, this is a terrible idea. This will only set you back. And to be fair, one, she's often right. Two, I had tried a lot of different, I mean, she's been at that point, had been with me for, geez, 11 years
Yes.
and had said, and had seen some weird shit with my eating. So she was like, okay. And so we argued about it, thought about it. And finally she said, okay, look, oh, you're going to quit eventually, knock yourself out. And I can't, and people have asked me, like, what was it that made you feel like you really wanted to do this? And I don't have a super strong resolve other than I just intuitively knew the carbs didn't make me feel well. And I kind of knew, like, on a surface level, protein is important for healing, for, hormones, for those other things. And I had been eating so much carbs. I knew, like, yeah, I've kind of reduced my protein and fat. And so it was a very strange few days, especially going into working with a group of dietitians and they're eating their bagels and oatmeal. And I remember one of them was like, that's different. I'm eating my pound of ground beef in the morning. Um, and the first few days were not good. I mean, the first few days I had terrible headaches, was not great. And I didn't know at that point, like, hey, you should probably be drinking plenty of fluids, taking some electrolytes,
Electrolytes.
especially if you're
Yeah.
super high carb to low carb. Yeah, I would tell anybody doing this electrolytes that I was driving home and like traffic lights hurt. Like it's the worst headache of my life, And of course my wife's like, hey, how's that diet going? It's great. But by like I want to say day 3 or 4, like all of a sudden it's just like my muscles weren't hurting. And I was so grateful. But at that time I was like, well, I'm not running. That's why. It's because I'm not running. I haven't not run in a very long time for that, 3 or 4 days. But then I noticed I was really calm. Like I was much more present around my patients. I wasn't like trying to, okay, finish up. So I go to this person. And I'll never forget being in a meeting. We had staff meetings and my coworker next to me was getting a little jittery and she's like, all right, I gotta get a snack. I gotta go. Do you want a snack? And I was like, hey, Christy, we're gonna eat lunch at noon. And she goes, Michelle, it's almost 2. And I was like, I'll never forget that because before that, I would have to eat every 2 to 3 hours. I was the person that always had a granola bar on them.
Mhm.
Or if I didn't have one, it would almost be like panic. I need to know where 7-Eleven is so I can go there quickly when I'm getting shaky. And I still think about that. I'm like, wow. And I was going for like 6 to 8 hours without eating. I would eat 3 times a day. And at this point, Green was actually actively, she's a scientist. And,
Yeah,
so
so
obviously
yes.
both of us,
She
she's
was
very
studying
smart.
at this point.
She was very studying it and she was listening to lots of different podcasts and highlighting things. And initially, it's funny, her attempt was to show me how wrong I was. And, she'd tell you now that as she went through this, she was like, oh my God, might be right. So she didn't tell me that initially, of course. But it was about 2.5, 3 weeks in that she beat me home. And when I got home, she was like, "Hey, I need to talk to you," sitting on the couch. And, when your spouse says that, you're always like, "Oh no, like, did I do something terrible? Did somebody die?" And I went and sat with her and she said, "Hey, look, I've been looking at this a lot and I don't know if this is going to be good for you long term, but this is the best your anxiety has been in the 11 years that I've known you." And so we both just sat there and we're like, whoa, and
Mhm.
that is when, she said, "Okay, I've been researching this a lot and this is what I found." And of course I had access to clinical trials too. She's like, "You've got to go research type 2 diabetes." She's like, "There's hundreds of articles." I'm like, "No, there's not." Like, I would know. I'm a dietitian. They would have taught me. She's like, "No, there's hundreds on low carb diets and type 2 diabetes."
Mhm.
And so then, of course there was, and I became both angry and fascinated. And, there was just kind of this start with Dr. Eid and Chris Palmer on mental health. And
Mhm.
I very naively thought, like, "Oh my God, I'm going to take this to my clinical director and she's going to want to implement this. We're going to start to see results in our inpatient and outpatient clinics." And of course it was just like, "Oh, I'm so glad that's working for you. But no, that's not what we do here."
Right.
um,
Right.
so that, yeah.
That's a whole nother thing. But yeah, I just think it's amazing that even with 3 days of headaches and feeling really bad and but you had enough resolve to keep going. This is what's always fascinating to me, that there's something inside of us, because I had a very similar experience where I was gonna do it for 30 days and just try this carnivore thing out, and I couldn't believe I didn't know that I felt bad. I mean, I knew I
Yeah.
didn't feel good. I knew, but I thought I was felt as good as you could feel because I ate whole foods diet, I didn't drink alcohol anymore, I took supplements, like, I really thought, "This is as good as it gets," and was really willing to accept not feeling very good a lot of the time, because I thought that was normal. Like, I
Mhm.
just didn't know. So, that's interesting to me that so many of us somehow, even if it's because a lot of us go, like, hard in, we're like,
Mhm.
and you don't have to do that. I wanna tell people you don't have to do it that way, but I'm an all or nothing kind of person, and so I went all in too, and just the things that started improving, you're like, "This how can this be?" And wouldn't I have been taught this? And I too was angry because when I learned that most of these neurotransmitters, like serotonin, the majority of serotonin is made in the gut, and I'm like, not once did anybody ever mention that we could talk to our clients about gut health before they get on medication, and not saying you don't ever want medication, but, like, isn't it unethical at this point to not teach this, know this? I mean, this is crazy.
And that's where, now that I knew,
Yeah.
now that I all of a sudden had this flood of information and I had all this clinical trials and, very quickly reached out. And I'm so fortunate that I mean, Dr. Ben Bickman and Eric Weckman and Tony
Mm,
Hamp were so gracious and email conversations with me and sharing their work. And I now I had a conundrum, because it was like, what do I do?
right.
Because I felt like it is no longer ethical for me to tell someone with type 2 diabetes to consume carbs when I know they don't need to. Or
Mm,
what about somebody who has an infection, who's obese? I worked in another facility. So the hospital chain I worked for oversaw several facilities, and one was mental health. And I recorded how many teaspoons of sugar every day of the week, and it averaged, I want to say it was between 39 and 43 teaspoons a day. We were
mhm.
giving mental health patients,
Yeah,
and I was like, "This, we can't do this. This is unacceptable." But once again, those are the guidelines, and
I know.
that's what we quote unquote have to do. That's what we give our kids in schools, our jails, hospitals are all bound by these horrific nutrition guidelines.
And the way we're all educated. So if you do,
Yes.
yeah, especially for dietitians. So, yeah, really, and then it just permeates everywhere, and then everybody thinks, "Oh, more fruits and vegetables and bacon is bad for you," and I'm like, "You're an intelligent person, come on." So I wanna talk about diabetes specifically because I know you have a really exciting project that you're involved in, and it's just not surprising to me that people were very open to you because you're also, well, just because of who you are, you're also really smart, and so I'd be like, "Oh, she wants to know, yeah, let's connect with her," so that doesn't really surprise me. But now you're doing a project with Ken Berry, and tell us about that.
Yeah, yeah. Ken reached out to me and said, "Hey, I want to I want to change diabetic care."
Hmm.
And as much as like I appreciate stuff like that, I'm generally like, "Yay, good luck. Let me know how that goes." No, he's fantastic. And he said, "Would you be interested in being on this project, this committee?" And he said, "I'm going to get, other doctors and Dr. Eric Westman, Ben Bickman, Tony Hampton, and Temple Stewart is the other RD." So I was like, "Yeah, let's do it." So the goal is the American Diabetes Association is the main resource for most people with type 2 diabetes.
Hmm.
We know if your A1C is 6.5, 6.6, 6.7, you have damages being done. But because they've struggled so much getting A1Cs under 7 on their diet, the consistent carb diet, that's their standard is 7 or less, which to us is ridiculous. Like, so what this site is going to be, it's a nonprofit, and we've almost met our fundraising goal. The goal is $100,000. Last time I checked, we're about $94,000. And what we want to do is just have a resource for people where they can read very easy, simple, easy to read articles, how to reverse type 2 diabetes, why we are, embracing low carbohydrate nutrition. Because this isn't like a, low fat, something that you're going to do temporarily. Nobody wants to eat a diet that they don't like the taste of, that isn't satiating. Like, we want to teach people how to eat in a way that they look forward to, that's delicious, but also stabilizes blood sugar, and that's a high fat, high protein or moderate to high protein, low carbohydrate diet.
Hmm.
Also, for creative humans, we're going to have recipes. We're going to have all different kinds of things. I've seen the skeleton of the website, and it's really coming together. And so, unfortunately, if someone's diagnosed with type 2 diabetes right now and just Googles it, they're going to get the standard terrible advice that is just going to keep them sick. People have asked me, like, "Hey, why, if we know we can reverse type 2 diabetes with a low carb diet, why isn't it talked about more?"
Hmm.
And second to cancer, type 2 diabetes is the most profitable disease out there. It makes so much money for physicians and pharmaceuticals because of the cascade effect, right? Like, once you have type 2 diabetes, you're 4 times more likely to have issues with your heart. You're significantly more likely to do an amputation. You're going to have infections. Your teeth are going to rot. You're going to have neuropathy. So, I want people to get mad. It's hard to be like, really? They would compromise our health and watch us, our loved ones decline for money. Yeah, absolutely. That's what's happening. And so I'm just really proud to be a part of something that can hopefully continue to grow and continue to educate people so they don't have to go through. I have patients that were diabetic for 30 years, so
Hmm.
that's something that I'm very passionate about.
Hmm. So that and eating disorders and running, like you have a lot of passions. Is there anything else that you wanted to say? I think people might want to know, like, so what do you eat? Your eating disorder didn't rear its ugly head, even though you were eating probably high fat. Were you moderate protein? What are you eating right now? And I guess let's tie that in,
Yeah,
like your
that's a
mental
good
health and.
question. That's a really good question. And I think that's something that a lot of people, dietitians right now are just losing their minds with the idea of eliminating carbohydrates or even reducing carbohydrates and
Okay.
not eating processed foods. And, I always like to say, like, we have to look at eating disorders just like we're looking at mental health disorders like bipolar disorder and, schizoaffective disorder and schizophrenia. They're not just psychiatric disorders because I hear that initial argument like, "Hey, we can't ask somebody with a dysfunctional relationship with food to exclude these foods because they're going to want to eat them more." But that doesn't look at what's going on the metabolic level. And if we don't address metabolism, this is super important. Dietitians, health pro, you are going to have relapse. I would be very confident. I mean, I would die on that hill. I'm not going to say you might have relapse. I'm going to say you will have relapse.
Hmm.
And you got to think about it like epilepsy, right? Like, babies have epilepsy. They didn't do anything wrong. They weren't born with, they're not like drinking Coca-Cola. It's just they have a genetic metabolic abnormality in the brain. When they
Hmm.
take in glucose, they have seizures. This is well documented. We've
Yes.
put children
Very
and
well
babies on
documented. Yeah.
ketogenic diets and they don't seize. And so we're seeing the same thing. I mean, we just had the study come out on Alzheimer's disease and bipolar disorder. And there's actually a study right now being done with ketogenic diets and anorexia. that if, it's twofold in my opinion. Well, it's several fold, but one, simply stabilizing blood glucose has a powerful effect on anxiety. And that can be done with, protein and fat. Second, like you were saying, your brain needs neurotransmitters. The brain needs also those vitamins, minerals, and cofactors. It needs B12. It needs, folate. It needs carnitine and carnosine and all those things.
Mhm.
And secondly, when, you know, and this is hypothetically, and we're learning more and more about this with the studies, but just like in epilepsy, if somebody with anorexia or bulimia is eating all of these carbohydrates and processed food, they're saying that your brain just does not utilize that well. And I've
Mhm.
known that since I was a child. When I had a lot of, cake, I was super anxious. And so we're not saying like, it's not saying like, oh, I really created this, I want this, then I don't have this. It's saying like, hey, I realize that this contributes to my disease. And
Yeah.
so I'm going to choose to eat in a way that gives me freedom. I don't worry about food. I don't think about food. I don't feel restricted because I don't eat, Pop Tarts for breakfast and cookies for dinner. I'm eating in a way that, humans, we've eaten for a very long time. Our
Mhm.
diets are very high in animal protein and fat. And as we've moved away from that, now I think this latest statistic is 93% of us have some type of metabolic issue.
Mhm.
So that's, yeah. And so that's, that's kind of how I do it. I tell people too, and I tell people I work with, like, you don't, I can eat anything I want at any point. It's not like, oh, I'm going to tell myself I'm never going to have this again. 99% of the time, I will choose not to, because eating for me has now just become something that fuels my life. It's no longer something I think about, obsess about, have to have it around me every 2 hours. It's something that I appreciate and enjoy and move on. And I think that's what food is really meant to be.
True. Yeah. And I wanted to write an article and maybe do a podcast on, are we fueling ourselves or fooling ourselves? Because I think a lot of
Mm.
people think the fruits and vegetables, you just talked about all these nutrients. I don't think people understand that just because something might have a nutrient in it doesn't mean the body can absorb it. So I thought it was all about gut microbiome. And then I started realizing, well, that's a whole nother topic
No,
because that's
that's
all about
actually a very
circadian,
that's a very
circadian.
important thing
Yeah.
to notice. Is most people
Yeah.
associate like, oh, fruits and vegetables, they're all good, they're full of this nutrition. The human body does not absorb nutrition from plants very well.
Yeah.
Like my favorite
Right.
example is, steak and spinach, right? Like they both have, if you had, a certain amount, they both have, theoretically, you could get the same amount of iron in spinach versus steak, but the body only absorbs, like, I want to think say it's like 1.7%, where
Yeah.
the body can absorb up to 20%. So
Yeah.
eating all these plants, and when you eat plants, they come with a bunch of things that are just not necessarily ideal, especially for people that are healing. They've got lots of fiber, which is irritating to the gut. A lot of plants have phytic acid, they have lectins, they have glutens, they have things that are potentially inflammatory. And it's like every dietitian loses their mind, but that's true. That's why when people remove plants from the diet, at least for a specific period of time, they tend to do better. They tend to heal really well.
Right, exactly. And so what's funny, not funny, haha, is how attached people are to the ideas. And so what you were talking about with humility, like it took a lot of humility to say, wait, we might be wrong about this. Like when I'm telling people to eat the rainbow for their diversifying their microbiome to help their brain, that was actually not good, helpful advice when I first started teaching. And then, but once you try it for yourself, you can't deny it. And then I started talking to more and more people that this is what happens when they really hone in on animal sources of food for their fat and their protein. The body knows how to use that. We absorb those nutrients and those amino acids that then become that's the precursor to the neurotransmitters. And I don't know, it just all makes sense, but not if you can't open your mind. And I guess I'm just really still surprised at how attached people are to their spinach and and telling people to eat things that even if the person is saying that makes me feel sick, like I don't understand. But I do get people that also say they don't like meat. And that's, I don't push anybody anywhere. I just think you have to listen to your own body.
Yeah, no, I agree. I would think, to me, When things are getting significantly worse, right? It's like that's I think you have to look at how things are going. It's like if you were running a company and you were $150,000 in debt, it would be like, well, we better just keep on keeping on. It'd be like, oh, maybe we ought to look at this. This is not going well. And in the last, since the nutrition guidelines came out, the rate of disease has skyrocketed, and not just obesity. I mean, everything, even mental health disorders.
Yes.
And so it is interesting that we don't stop and take a look, especially, now that we have really good evidence that the power of just keeping insulin low. If we could just get dietitians on board with like, hey, let's axe the carbs and have people find sources of protein and fat they like, let's do that. But, I truly believe we're talking about this a little bit offline, it's threefold. One, as
Mhm.
we know, dietitian education is just so bad. And I also feel like those processed foods, what they're really paying for. They're not buying. No dietitian is going to go into the room with someone who's obese and say, "Have a Pepsi." But when the patient says, like, "God, I really like Pepsi. Is it okay if I have a Pepsi?" They're going to say, "Oh yeah, just don't have it very often. Have it in moderation."
Moderate.
Because we're taught that idea, and the word moderation is arbitrary, and nobody knows what it means. And these processed foods are, as you know, are designed to override our body's ability to stop eating and drinking them. So we have that going. And then you have just this lack of humility. You have like, well, I can do this. So what's your problem? Maybe a dietitian is young and lean and they're doing something. So they think everybody else should do that, even if it's clearly not working for their patient population.
Right.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
tough.
Well, and I also think I think people think they feel fine, and
Mhm.
because they don't know any different, and we've been all been eating similarly for so long. I just don't think they know how good they could feel. So some of that humility, like, it's just hard to take a big bite of humble pie sometimes, just because it is like, I know better and I know what the nutrients and I've been educated, that kind of nonsense. That's all ego.
Mhm.
But also truly, I think people sometimes don't think that it's a problem because they don't know that they could feel so much better. But I'm also thinking about, I trained with Dr. Georgia Ede, who I adore. And I remember her talking about, because I have not worked with people with eating disorders. So I've done a lot. I do a lot with stress and anxiety recovery. But her really kind of cautioning us around ketogenic diets with people that have struggled with restrictive eating, because in her experience, people were afraid of fat. Did you experience I was afraid of fat a little bit, just because growing up, in the 80s, with everything was low fat and I did everything diet and low fat, it took me a while to really embrace fat. Not too long, because you feel so your brain is like, "Thank you." And so it didn't take long for me to embrace it. But I think that's, people are afraid of the fat. And so then eating a higher fat, moderate protein, low carbohydrate diet, even though if they try it and feel better, sometimes they're afraid to eat that much fat.
Yeah, personally, I mean, certainly through my early adolescence and adulthood, I did. When I was a super high carbohydrate person, I remember, we ate a lot of chicken. I would measure out like 1 tablespoon of peanut butter.
Mhm.
It's probably rare to get over 50 grams of fat a day, and now that's per meal. I think because I was so sick, and I had nothing to lose, maybe that when I first started eating more meat and fat, I wasn't as afraid. I do
Mhm.
remember a moment we got this like super cheap meat grinder on Amazon,
Mhm.
and we had bought like a eighth of a cow, so we had all these cuts and some were super tough. So I'll grind it up. And I remember as I was grinding up some meat, I remember specifically thinking like, oh, I got to get some suet. That's too lean. And I stopped when I thought that, and I was like, oh wow, like look at me, because that was so different than like you said years and years ago. I wouldn't have. There is this innate fear of fat will make you fat. Fat is bad. These messages that are so deep into you that you don't realize like fat is the best thing you can do for yourself. Fat is healing. Fat stabilizes hormones. Fat is important for essential fatty acids, fat soluble vitamins. So yeah, I see that as a potential barrier for people with eating disorders, and sometimes it takes time. You know, um, yeah.
But not enough to say, "Don't try it." That's the thing. I think I was not sure how cautious to be around that, because I have always disliked the all things in moderation. That just drives me insane when people say that, because that's like saying something that's clearly poisonous And even if it's not poisonous in someone else, if it's poisonous to you, your brain just doesn't work well with something. Why would you do why would you have it in moderation? Like, that makes no sense to me.
And it's like, who's trying to have just like this moderate life, this average? And unfortunately, a lot of people do. A lot of people have. Like you were saying earlier, I don't think most people know
Good
the
point.
human body is capable of incredible things. I feel like after I changed how I ate, I was able to kind of like reignite that fire with, running and with some other things. But, you become so beaten down that you think like, man, if I could just work my 8 to 5 and walk around the block once and then crash on the couch, like that's it. That's all I can do. And yeah, you kind of forget just how incredible life can be. And
Mhm.
when you tell somebody to eat all things in moderation, it's a society, we have set people up to fail. There's
Right.
because processed foods are everywhere. Our modern food environment, it's not like, oh wow, the only thing available is grass-fed beef and a little bit of raw milk. It's like processed foods are so ubiquitous. You can't go anywhere. You can't go to the hospital, your vet clinic, everywhere they have some type of sugary processed food.
Oh, right. Yeah, it's everywhere. Yeah, it is. And I think when people start to slowly get their brain wrapped around this, it makes so much sense. And if they're willing to try it, is there anything that we've kind of missed that you definitely wanted to make sure that we tell people? I I feel like we've covered a lot.
No, I think we covered a lot of things. Yeah, I'm honored to get to chat with you, and I'm just, I'm grateful for the journey I'm on.
Yeah, I'm grateful that you're around and on this journey and that I got to meet you and that we get to keep connecting. So what else? I know running is really you like to work out, you love to eat meat and eat your fat and meat. What else nourishes your body, mind, soul?
Oh man. I think the greatest thing, the first thing that came to my mind was just being close to the water.
Mhm.
We're very fortunate that we live in a place where it's about a little over a 2-hour drive to the coast. And so I love the sound of the ocean, laying on the beach. Yeah, I really treasure that. I also, it doesn't escape me. I have moments where, I'll never forget holding my first nephew. My sister had twin boys, holding my nephews, my oldest sister did. And I remember thinking, like, God, I used to pray to die. I used to not want to live. And here I am. I was, I think, 19 at that time, holding this kid. And now, like, I got to go see my nephew who's 13 play a soccer game. And my niece actually it's her birthday today. So we're going to go see. And it's just, life is so beautiful. And when you're so depressed and you can't
Mhm.
see it, And so I often will just stop and just be thankful. I often think, sometimes in life, like, I can't wait for that vacation or whatever. But, after being through, you know, such a serious eating disorder, like I love the day to day. I love the clients I get to work with. I love running in the trails. I love wrestling with my shepherd, my German shepherd. I love
Jackson.
watching a silly show on TV and eating meat, go to bed. Like I'm truly grateful. I mean, that might sound a little corny, but that's what makes me really happy.
No, that's beautiful, and I'm glad that you brought it back to that because yeah, I know how the story unfolded. I know you now, and it's just so sad to think about the 12-year-old that was gonna be relieved to have it all over. I just yeah, and there are plenty of people that are feeling like that out in the world, and we don't want them to have to do that. So I'm grateful that you're seeing people and that you're very public about everything and offering resources to people. And yeah, I'm just grateful to get to talk to you. So thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah.